All right, everybody, joining us now on Setting the Pace. He's been on this show earlier this season, but making a return from Forbes.com. It's Es Baraheni. S. Appreciate you coming back, man. How you doing?
I'm good, man. Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it. I was just telling you off air just how excited I am for. If you guys don't know, I covered the Toronto Raptors, and so I'm hyped to see Pascal Siakam and OG Anunoby in the playoffs. Just because it wasn't too long ago these guys were on this side trying to do something. So I'm excited to see how they look in the postseason, man. Excited to see how the Pacers look too.
Yeah, and what's really interesting is those two guys could end up facing each other in round two
Mm-hmm.
of the playoffs if things shake out that way. So
Oh
that
yeah.
possibility is going to be an exciting one because ever since OG was traded to New York, we never got to see him play against Pascal with the Pacers. So we
Right.
never had
Right.
that
Yeah.
matchup. OG dealing with that elbow injury for quite a bit of time this year, just limited him a lot in some games. But this is a really interesting series here from the Pacers and Bucks perspectives because of the Giannis, cliffhanger there of what's going to happen with Giannis. Is he going to play? Is he not going to play? There's so much up in the air. And then you've got a Pacers team that's playing pretty good basketball over the last couple of months. Their defense has gotten a lot better. And the Bucks, they've kind of stumbled down the stretch. Three of their last 10 games, they've only won. They've won 3-7 in their last 10 games. So, this is a
Yeah.
really weird spot because the Pacers usually aren't known for being talked about as the favorite. But right now, it feels like a lot of people are leaning towards picking the Pacers in this series, especially with Giannis's uncertainty. So just want to get your perspective on this series from someone that maybe isn't a Pacer or a Bucks fan.
Yeah, I mean, just generally, especially with the Giannis injury, not knowing how long he's going to be out for, if he'll even return for this series, I feel like he would return. Although we can't really rule out the fact that he won't. Regardless, I sort of agree with the consensus that it's Indiana that's the favorite in this one. I think the way the Bucks stumbled, and we can probably get into some of the offensive, defensive, matchup type of things that might happen in the series. But generally, to your point that you just made, the Bucks defense got better, but did it get better enough? And when you add in that Giannis element to it, where you're removing one of their best defenders, can they sustain for longer? And I guess the added question to that, as we sort of play this chess match, which is what any postseason series is, you know, can their defense hold up enough for their offense to compete with the Pacers? And Indiana obviously has had an incredible offense all season. They add a Pascal Siakam dynamic that we sort of mentioned just now. I I think it propels the Pacers to be the favorites in this sort of any way you look at it. And so we can get into the specifics of how it all looks, but I would agree with you that the Pacers are favored in my opinion.
Yeah, when you talk about the Bucks defense, it was 19th in net rating when Adrian Griffin was there. It improved to 15th. So
Mm-hmm.
it got a little bit better, but not much. I know their transition defense has gotten better. I know TJ
Yeah.
McConnell talked in practice about how their rim defense is like number one in the league since Doc Rivers took over. And with Brook and Giannis there, it's kind of an old school or front court.
Mm-hmm.
That is something that will be problematic because the Pacers like to get into the paint. They like to score a lot at the rim and they like to shoot a lot of threes. I mean, it's kind of the
Yeah.
modern day basketball, but they do play a random style. But in all of these matchups, we never saw Pascal play for the Pacers against the Bucks when the Pacers beat them 4-1 in the regular season. And then you also have to realize Doc Rivers was not there for any of that.
Yeah.
Neither was Patrick Beverley. So there are some different players in here that are going to be big factors. But when you look at Pascal, someone that you covered quite a
And
bit,
also no Ben Mather and nobody healed on the Pacers
right,
side.
right, right.
And so that changes the dynamic of India. Like, you throw in more Nembard, more Neesmith, and you're looking like a much better, more well-rounded defensive team. Sorry to
Yeah.
interrupt you,
No,
but
no,
yeah,
no. And same with Ben Shepherd. Ben Shepherd will probably get some significant minutes off the bench as well because he's probably their best backup wing defender. So,
right. Yeah.
I think he'll get some minutes, but I want to look more at Pascal because this is a guy that you're very familiar with.
Sure.
Curious when they've played Bucks teams of the past, how has Pascal usually performed against the Bucks, especially Giannis in that matchup? And has Giannis kind of been his primary defender?
Yeah, that's a good question. I know for sure in the 2019 season Giannis was not the primary defender on Pascal. I believe they would go Mark sorry, not Mark, Brook on Pascal, so that because Pascal wasn't that much of a shooter. So it was, hey, let him kind of space out. Brook can camp inside a little bit more. And then Giannis would either be on Mark. Yeah, he would usually be on Mark, kind of roaming around. And that gave him the ability to be such a great defender, defensive player of the year that season,
Hmm.
right? So that was in 2019. They haven't played in the playoffs since then. And I want to say before then, what was it? It would have been the 2016 or 17 series. And so you're facing a completely different Giannis
Right.
Antetokounmpo at that point. Like it's not even comparable. So it'd be hard to. And Pascal, I don't think was in the league at that point. I might be getting my years wrong
Yeah.
here. So it might just be the one series. In that one series, Pascal wasn't the primary on Giannis, and Giannis wasn't the primary on Pascal, vice versa. I think that generally, though, across the years through the regular season, Giannis has done well on Pascal, but Pascal has been able to score the ball against the Bucks pretty well as well. Just
Yeah.
getting into his bag as a mid-range scorer, finishing in and around the basket, using his speed and quickness against, kind of cross matches with Brook Lopez, getting him off of his spot. I also think just as a screener in the pick and roll, he can kind of get into the short roll, make a play. And so against the Bucks, that gets heightened a little bit because of the lack of their perimeter defense, or their perimeter defense, I should say, is a work in progress. Those are the areas where I've seen Pascal shine against the Bucks. That being said, I'm curious to see how it looks against this specific Bucks team, because I guess I'm just wondering how Milwaukee is going to pair up against Pascal's size without a guy like Giannis. Because
Hmm.
Bobby Portis is a favorable matchup for Pascal. I think Brook Lopez is a little bit too slow-footed to try one-on-one to really go after him, and likely they wouldn't want Brook chasing around Pascal for an entire series. And so that being said, I just don't know if there's that option that's available to guard a player like Pascal that gives you guys another advantage in this situation. And so yeah, I think yeah, he's gonna have a good series. I would probably wager.
Yeah, we've talked about it a little bit on this podcast over the last couple of days. Could the Bucks, if Giannis doesn't play in game one, we're just assuming he doesn't.
Mm,
Bobby Portis probably guards Miles Turner, knowing that Miles is the primary pick and pop, pick and roller with Tyrese Haliburton at the point of attack.
right.
So you don't want Brook Lopez in that, because we saw how Tyrese just obliterated
Mm-hmm.
everything the Bucks did in their drop coverage with Brook Lopez. So with Pascal not being as big of a threat from outside as Miles Turner, maybe they throw Brook Lopez on Pascal Siakam, and how much more does that open up for the Pacers? And then do they run more pick and roll, pick and pop stuff between Tyrese and Pascal, or maybe make Pascal the primary ball handler
Mm.
and run some different actions? I think that's a really interesting dynamic, though.
Since we're in the weeds here for a little bit, how do you feel about the way the Pacers could guard Dame? Just more generally, that was
Yeah,
something that kind of popped up initially when I thought of what this series could be too.
yeah. I mean, I think Nimhard is going to be okay with Dame. I think
Mm.
that if you look at some of the matchups that Nimhard really struggle with, it's more physical guards, like a Jalen Brunson type of player that can kind of get into him. But I
Right.
think he's able to kind of hang with Dame, and he really didn't have much of an opportunity to do it in the previous games because he wasn't starting. So
Mm-hmm.
he was kind of coming off the bench, playing a little bit more of a different role. And I think that Dame's still going to be Dame. I'm sure of that. He's going to have to be, because I think he knows more pressure is on him, but I
Right.
think the key is to make Dame work on the other side of the basketball as well, because we know Nimhard is probably who Dame will guard as well, hoping he can kind of hide a little bit more on Nimhard. But Nimhard is a point guard first, and he knows how to get into the paint. He's pretty crafty with what he does, and
Mm.
I think if you go back and watch some of the in-season tournament game, the Bucks went to a zone, and Nimhard was just flashing the middle on that zone and had like 6 points in a row. So I
Right.
think Nimhard just a really smart, crafty player. Not a great 3-point shooter, which does kind of hurt the Pacers' spacing a little bit, I think, more than what they used to have with Buddy and Bruce and Obi in the starting five. You kind of shrink that a little bit with Nimhard and Siakam out there, but
Yeah.
they're just so much more physical and so much more athletic and lengthy defensively. So it's kind of like they traded in some offense for some defense when they already had enough offense to really be great. So I
Yeah.
think with Dame, though, defensively, it'll mostly be Nimhard. If he gets in foul trouble, I can see them going to Neesmith.
Okay.
But
So that was essentially my question: is where does Neesmith kind of play into this? Because
yeah,
if he starts feeling it, if he starts because Nembhard is still a little bit small on the smaller side of things, and so if the pull-up shooting from Dame is just on another level this series, you can switch Neesmith onto him.
Yeah.
A little bit bigger body, obviously, more size, more ability to contest, and so that gives you a different look. That just from Rick Carlisle's perspective, I'm fascinated to see what he goes with first and
Yeah.
what the option will be, how they stagger it, because I don't think it'll just be Nembhard. I don't think
Yeah.
it'll just be Neesmith either. I think they're going to throw multiple defenders at Dame to just make it uncomfortable. I wouldn't be surprised if Pascal gets some kind of reps guarding him as well. I think that's a fascinating aspect, and I know we kind of got off track because we were
No.
talking about Pascal, but I think that's another element that he can sort of impact the game outside of the offensive perspective. It's when the going gets tough against these quicker guards, he actually does a pretty good job guarding at the point of attack. I know there have been some moments off ball. Hasn't been Caitlin. Shout out to Caitlin. I've
Yes.
seen the
Yes.
videos of him sort of falling asleep on ball and some defensive lapses, if you will. But I think when the going gets tough, there are moments where he can be a solid on ball defender against these quicker guards. I've seen
Yeah.
it against guys like Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell. He's been the primary guy sometimes when the Raptors have had to. I think we could see that with Dame too.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that we just saw against the Cavaliers last Friday was we saw Andrew Nembhard started out on Darius Garland. Aaron
Mhm.
Neesmith started out on Donovan Mitchell.
Right.
And they ended up switching that in the second half. And Andrew Nembhard did a much, much better job on Donovan Mitchell than Aaron Neesmith did. I think he's just better at defending without fouling. And there was a possession that was like probably 2 minutes left in the game, maybe a minute and a half left in the game. And Nembhard just played, Don so good. Like Mitchell had no clear space whatsoever. He took a contested shot. I think he almost airballed it or like just grazed the front of the rim. It was just great defense. And Nembhard loves those challenges. Like he really wants to be
Mhm.
that defensive guy. And I know I've David Thorpe, when he's come on this show, he actually compared him. He thinks that Andrew Nembhard has some Drew Holiday like,
Yeah, I could see
qualities
that.
in him.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I'm like, if he can kind of have a breakout moment in the playoffs, like that'd be really cool for him because I know he's still trying to like prove himself a little bit. Wasn't really the starter all year long, but it is nice to have Neesmith as a possibility. I think what's interesting is you talked about Caitlin. I listened to her podcast with Samson. There's a great listen. If you
Yeah.
haven't
Yeah.
listened, Piece of fans, you
Yeah,
need to
you,
listen
you
to that.
got the other Raptors guy.
Yes.
Sorry, pal. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
No, but I mean, I enjoy, everything. I'm glad to hear different people talk about it. But one thing
Yeah.
that she was talking about, and I think Samson like at first didn't have the same defensive assignments set up. She talked about how Middleton might be a little bit too big for Neesmith
Mm,
because of what Brandon Ingram did to Neesmith in New Orleans. Just
right.
like he was right there at the right time. He's 2 or 3 inches shorter, so the guy can get the shot over him. She thought about maybe putting Neesmith on Giannis
Right.
and talked about putting Pascal on Chris Middleton. And so I was wanting to get back
You're
to
eating
Pascal.
you're eating some fouls there on that rate though, because then yeah, I mean, not only does Neesmith foul a lot,
Right,
you know,
right.
and so like then you're putting Neesmith in foul trouble. Where are you gonna get that wing defender? I don't know, Caitlin. I
The,
gotta bring that up to you, I guess, but yeah.
yeah, the Pacers though they did build a wall the last 2 games
Hmm.
against the Bucks, and it was like Jalen Smith was starting at power forward before they got Siakam. They moved Obi Toppin to the bench, and Jalen was starting out on Giannis, and he was basically just standing at the free throw line, letting him
Yeah.
kind of have that room. And then Miles and whoever the other guard were, maybe it was Buddy, maybe it was Tyrese at times, they would all just form right there and make three for Giannis to get through. So
Right.
it was like, and he went down significantly in numbers for points per game. So I think,
And for what it's worth, like he's if he comes back, he's coming back
yeah,
probably at like 85,
yeah,
75%. He's not coming back
yeah,
100%. And
and
so
you might be
it'll
able to
look
get
different.
away
Yeah.
with hiding, a Neesmith on him, but
Sure.
Neesmith overplays all the time. So that's the thing. And I know Chris Middleton. To me, I think Chris Middleton's kind of the X factor for the Bucks in this series. I know
Right.
he's not been incredibly healthy this year, and I know that his numbers have been down, but he knows how to win. And he hits a lot of big shots. He's had a lot of big moments in his career. And I think he'll know like I've got to step up. And he shot the ball really well. I think he shot over 50% in every game this year against the Pacers. So he had good looks. He just didn't take a lot of shots because Giannis was dropping 50 some points a game on the Pacers. So
Right. Yeah.
it was just one of those things. But I think for Indiana, just the different matchups that they have is going to be interesting. And I also think that the Obi Toppin factor could be very interesting because Obi Toppin has played incredible for the Pacers this year. I think he really fits the system. The last month, really, the month of April mostly, but a little bit of March too. Like he really just like took off as a kind of a scorer off the bench. And I think that with his versatility, I would be kind of interested to see if the Pacers maybe go with a Siakam, Toppin, Turner lineup at some point, just
Go a
to
little
throw
bit
some more
bigger,
size out
right?
there.
Yeah, yeah, I love that idea. I obviously Toppin comes with some flaws defensively, in that there's no question. But I think in terms of just getting more size out there, also the transition play will be incredible when you add him plus Pascal plus Tyrese. I agree with you that Middleton is the X factor here for the Bucks. He, in my opinion, if Giannis isn't playing for half of this series or more, he needs to be an all-star level player for them to win this series. And
Mm.
I think that's asking a lot out of the season we've gotten from Chris Middleton, where he's been on and off. There's been some inconsistency. Obviously, the injuries play a factor in that. But then you question if he can put it together for a 7 game series. That's been the question for me with the Bucks pretty much all year. Is all right, cool. We've had some moments from Dame. We've had obviously an incredible season from Giannis. The defense is picking up, but can Middleton be that final puzzle piece for them? And yeah, I'm really fascinated from the Bucks' perspective on that side. When you bring up Toppin and just Indiana in general, another guy who I think can just be, I mean, you know this more than anybody, the change of pace that TJ McConnell can bring and add to a game just out of nowhere. He's like throwing a firecracker on the basketball court. And I think that could also be a bit of an X factor here. The defensive point of attack stuff, I think he, like Nembhard, can get into the paint, right? Create attention, and like he's going to get a paint touch regardless. And that creates open shots. I think the bench lineup, I was looking this up earlier, but like one of the bench lineups doesn't play often. It's only 45 minutes post All-Star break, but it's McConnell, Smith, Shepard, Toppin, and McDermott, and it's plus 31 in those minutes. And so like he finds ways to create offense, and I think that will be a bit of an X factor here against the Bucks team, who again at the point of attack I just still don't really believe in their ability to guard guards.
Yeah.
So there could be a big series for Tyrese there. There could be a big series for Nembhard, maybe McConnell. We'll see, right?
Yeah, I'm kind of interested to see if Carlisle does try to pair McConnell and Halliburton more together,
Cool.
especially if Nimhard gets in foul trouble, right? Because I could see them throwing McConnell potentially on Dame. I don't know how good of a defensive matchup that would be. I don't know. We really don't talk a lot about TJ's on ball defense. I mean, he's a scrappy guy, but I
Yeah.
don't know how
Maybe he
much
could
he's.
scrap for like 5 minutes,
Yeah,
give you five. I don't know, 5 minutes is too
yeah.
much in an NBA game, but yeah.
But like just making Dame work on defense, I think would be something that TJ could really do well.
Yeah.
So you might be able to get some back on the offensive end. Like he's shooting incredible. Like the last 20 some games, like 55% from two, 53% from three. Like he's not, and like they're giving him open looks, obviously, because he's not a prolific 3-point shooter, but he's definitely hitting them at a high rate now. And he's put
Right.
a lot of work into that shot. I mean, I watch him pregame and it's just crazy to see how much he puts into it. So
Reluctant. He is
yeah,
reluctant though. He's just like, do I have to shoot this ball right now? Are you guys sure? I've
yeah,
seen him sometimes in the corner. He's like, I don't know, but he takes them.
yeah.
I'm excited. I'm honestly, as we talk about this and as we break this down, because I thought about this series in preparation for this podcast, but sort of just to hear your perspective from the Pacers side of things, it's opened up a few different options for me in terms of how this series could work out.
Mm.
Uh, how are you feeling about Giannis coming back in general? Do you feel confident in the fact that he'll return at some point this series? What's your percentage on that even?
Yeah.
Because it's a completely different series once you throw that in, right?
I mean, yeah, I mean, you're talking about the best player in the
Yeah,
series right now. I mean, MVP level player. So, yeah, I mean, it's definitely going to make a big difference. Is he fully healthy? That's the biggest question.
right.
And I think if Indiana, I think he's going to come back. I think Rick Carlisle said they're preparing like he's going to be there for game one because you just never know. Like,
Yeah, yeah,
they could say he's out until Sunday morning, and then all of a sudden, oh, he's questionable to play in this game. That's kind of how things happen in the playoffs. They try to play a little poker here and not let you know what's going
yeah,
on.
yeah.
But I would assume if the Pacers beat them pretty handily in game one, he is definitely back for game two. If it's a close loss, maybe the Bucks try to play one more without him, let him have about, I would say, close to like was 2.5 weeks then for that game 3 Friday in Indianapolis. So I could see him definitely at least coming back for game 3. I know Shams had a report today saying that he could possibly miss both games 1 and 2. Antoine Walker was on that broadcast and he said he shouldn't come back till game 3. I think that's a lot of pressure to put on your star player to bring him back on the road in game 3. Like, yeah, I'm sure he's not afraid of that or anything like that, but it's just a lot of
Right.
pressure,
Yeah.
especially if he's not fully healthy. And you got to think long term because this has just not been a good Bucks year. Like, I know they were number 2 for a while, but they just haven't had that season that they expected to have after
It's
getting
not
Dame.
it's not like if you're resting Giannis, you're skipping out on a championship opportunity because
Right.
I don't think they're a championship team. I think they
Right.
would. Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you on that front.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and you got to look long term, and I think that's what I would do if I was a Bucks, just because Giannis is so important to your franchise. You don't want him to come back and then re-injure it, and
Right.
then potentially miss more time next season. Like
Hmm.
that's the worst case scenario for them. But I think he's going to come back. I would say there's a probably 90% chance that he's back for game 2. I definitely think he'll be back for game 3. I'd be shocked if he's not.
Is it a bit of a staggered time for game 1 to 2? Is it like
It's
Sunday,
Sunday, Tuesday,
Wednesday?
Sunday,
Oh, okay.
Tuesday,
Okay,
and then
gotcha.
Friday, Sunday. So
Right. So maybe game 3. I could see game 3 just because of that big gap.
yeah.
Sometimes they do that for series, and so now he has a bit of an extra week off, but who knows? We'll see.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting dynamic, and I think for the Bucks, one of the things that I'm really fascinated with is Patrick Beverley,
Mm,
because if you put Patrick Beverley in the starting lineup, it really and Giannis doesn't play. Like, just look at how weak that Milwaukee bench is. You're
right.
just like talking about a team that they already struggled to stop the Pacers bench before, and now the Pacers bench has been playing so well with that lineup you just talked about with McDermott and Shepard and Toppin and McConnell and Smith. Like, it doesn't sound that great on paper, but they know how to
They
play
would
together.
work. Yeah. Yeah.
So, and
Absolutely.
we'll see if McDermott gets into the rotation. I could see him probably getting cut out of that, maybe going to a 9-man rotation. Maybe you play Neesmith, Nimhard, or Siakam with the second unit. I know they've not loved playing a lot of Toppin and Siakam with a big. I know I mentioned that earlier as a possibility. They haven't done that a lot. It's either been one or the other. They've done more Neesmith, Nimhard, and second halves with that bench unit. So I think that could be something to keep an eye on, especially if Dame's out there for 40 some minutes a game. Probably just keep somebody out there to guard him and check him at all times. But I think the dynamic though of Patrick Beverley. I wanted to ask you about this because
Yeah.
him guarding Tyrese Haliburton. Obviously, they have a little history from when he was with Chicago and things like that. And we know that Patrick Beverley can kind of be a dirty player.
Yeah.
Is that something Pacer fans should be a little bit concerned about?
Worried
Is
about?
Dirty Bev?
Yeah. I mean, look, yeah, he's going to be feisty. I don't want to liken him to TJ McConnell because I don't think they're very similar, but they kind of get in your face, get into your grill type of guys, play with their heart on the sleeve, if you will. And so I think in that level, Pat Bev will be getting into him a little bit. I guess I don't want to throw the question back at you, but for Halliburton, and I think this is another sort of question mark from this series. It's like, how do you feel about him going into the postseason? How do you? Because I know there's obviously been he hasn't been the same post injury, all that stuff. How does that factor into this question about Pat Bev? You know,
Yeah. Um, I still feel like we haven't seen Tyrese fully healthy. I still think that there are some limitations to what he's been able to do. Like he clearly is not shooting the ball as well as he once was.
right?
And that's part of the problem is like just putting that extra pressure on that hamstring that he,
Yeah,
pulled. So
yeah,
I think that's a big factor. But I also think he's he's not been scoring as much. He's kind of deferred more to Pascal. Pascal's been the leading scorer since the All-Star break.
right.
And I think that's going to continue to be that way. I think I forget who talked about it was Draymond. Draymond Green brought this up on his podcast saying that, if the Pacers want to win, Pascal's got to be the number one guy. Well, Draymond newsflash, Pascal has been the number one guy for the Pacers for the
Yeah,
past 3 months. So, and I think Tyrese understands like my job is to pass first and score second. And there's going to be times when I need him to score, but I've been a little bit underwhelmed with Tyrese in pressure recently because
right.
he seems like he's kind of, falling in love with that step back three while the percentage hasn't been that high. But one thing we do know about Tyrese, just from since he's been here, like when the games are usually the biggest, he shows up for those games. Like you saw what he did in the in-season tournament, even against Boston, like the big shots that he hit with great defense on him. So I think he's gonna figure out a way to counter all the stuff Pat Bev does. There might be one game in the series where Pat Bev really messes with him, but I think he is so smart, and the adjustments he's going to make as a player in a
Hmm.
series, I'm really fascinated to see because he doesn't usually get beat very often back to back by the same type of coverage, that kind of thing. He's so smart about reading defenses and things like that. So if you throw something new at him, he's going to adjust and have it
Right.
locked down for the next game. So I think Pat Bev will do a good job of kind of forcing him left a little bit more because he likes to go right a ton, and we saw him do that when he was with Chicago. But you're going to have to really set the right screens and get him the right angles to take advantage of that. And I think that he might get a break on defense guarding Pat Bev because Pat Bev's not like the most prolific scorer. But one thing Tyrese can't do is fall asleep on defense because Pat Bev can hit from outside.
Right.
And we saw how Max Strus in like the final 3 minutes of that game against the Cavs last Friday just took advantage of Tyrese Haliburton ball watching and
Yeah.
crashing the glass for offensive rebounds, relocating for three, putting everybody in a defensive scramble. Tyrese can't be that version of himself. He has to be locked in.
I'm actually curious if they end up throwing two to the ball with Tyrese. So now it's a blitz or hard hedge or the biggest showing or little hedge and recover. Like there's a couple of different ways. Trap, even you could trap Tyrese and just get the ball out of his hands. And so that is an interesting little wrinkle that Milwaukee can throw out. I don't know how soon in the series they would throw that out. Hallie probably would have to beat them a couple of times for them to do that. But at the same time, you get the ball out of, I'm just thinking from the Bucks perspective, you get the ball out of the best playmaker.
Yeah.
You force it into the short roll area likely. Siakam can hurt you in that aspect, but also if you close out on Siakam properly, now he's kicking it out to Nembhard, not a good shooter, right? As we
Yeah.
mentioned earlier. Or yes, Miles Turner on the dump off or Neesmith, right? And so you'd rather live with that than Tyrese Haliburton beating you if you're the Milwaukee Bucks. And so kind of full circle moment here. I think to your point, Nembhard, X Factor, Neesmith, X Factor, McConnell, maybe even X Factor.
Yeah.
These complementary guys will have to hit their shots because I do think Hallie's going to get that type of attention. And then, how is Pascal going to feast off of that too? I think that's a really, really fascinating aspect of this.
Yeah. There's going to be a lot of different things thrown at Tyrese's way. Like we know
Yeah.
that Doc Rivers is not going to just let Tyrese do what Tyrese does. And I'll be surprised if they play any drop coverage. I'm assuming they'll hedge a lot, switch a
Yeah.
lot, try to make things difficult for him. But I think Pat Bev's going to fight through a lot of screens to try to stay with him because Pat Bev's really
Right.
good at doing that. He's good at navigating screens, and that's one thing Pascal was struggling a little bit with earlier, was his ability to navigate
Navigate
through
through.
those screens. He kind of just gets
Oh
hung up on it,
man.
like
Yeah. Oh man.
Um,
It's funny. It's funny you say that because that used to be one of his best defensive qualities, and
really,
now it's just yeah. It's the
he's getting
well,
older.
getting up there, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's one thing Nimhard does such a great job at. He gets
Yeah.
so skinny on those screens
Mm-hmm.
and fights through, and I think that's what Pat Bev does pretty well too. Like that's part of the reason why Pat Bev has been able to stay in the league. I know
Yeah.
he wears his welcome out everywhere he goes, but he's I think he is kind of one of those guys that can really be a junkyard dog and kind of make things interesting. And I think Bobby Portis is another guy that can. He's been in these big moments before. He knows what it takes. He can hit some shots if you leave him open. I
Sure.
think that could be, my biggest thing in this series is I think that Pascal and Miles have to dominate the Portis Lopez matchup. They cannot allow that to be anywhere close to even because if they are
Right.
kind of trading baskets back and forth, like you're expecting Middleton and Dame to kind of go off a little bit from Milwaukee, but if you can kind of control everything else, you're hoping Tyrese and Neesmith and McConnell can kind of match that. Maybe Nimhard a little bit there too, but Pascal and Miles have to be just crushing both of the Bucks bigs without Giannis in any part of the series. They just can't allow for Lopez to hit like 3 of 3 from three because he can do that. And
Right.
if you're Miles defensively, you have to make sure that you're closing out on those threes and still being effective in the paint too. So I mean it's not like they're easy matchups, but I think the Pacers clearly have the upper advantage when you're looking at Portis and Lopez versus Turner and Siakam.
Yeah, I mean, man, you've got me excited to watch how Pascal's going to work in this matchup because I think it's a pretty big game for his career, too. Like, it's a pretty big playoff series for his career. You talk about a lot of the conversation around Pascal and his playoff performances over the last whatever amount of years. I think this is pretty big because he has a team around him that works, that matches. And from a Raptors perspective, I think a lot of the dialogue, a lot of the narrative, if you will, was, hey, he never had the team around him to be able to be this great scorer, this great player in the postseason. Now that he has that team, I think this is going to be a big moment for him to be able to kind of embrace that, if you will, make the most of it. Because if I'm Milwaukee, I'm saying, all right, cool. Halliburton is not beating us. Let's see who else can beat us in the series.
Yeah.
And, Siakam, obviously, you mentioned the leading scorer post All-Star break. Like, he's been able to get to his buckets, but is that going to be enough when you have Dame on the other side? You mentioned Bobby Portis, Brook Lopez, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, that's where the series might come down to, which is exciting.
Yeah, we talked about it. We talked about the experience going against the youth, and
Right.
Tyrese has never been here. Nimhard never been in the playoffs.
Right.
Neesmith was on the Celtics, but he really didn't play a whole lot. Same with Jalen Smith. Like, those guys they played the Bucks in that championship
Right.
run for Milwaukee, but they really didn't see the floor. But they kind of know what it takes because they've been a part of a team that knows how to get there. So their experience a little bit can hopefully play a factor. But Pascal winning a championship with Toronto, they really banked heavily on Bruce Brown winning a championship. That's why they kind of
Right.
brought him in here before they traded him to Toronto for
Right.
Pascal. And they end up keeping that championship experience and getting Siakam. But, and Miles has never won a playoff series, but Miles has been in a couple of game sevens, against the
Oh, I
Cavs
remember.
and the
Yeah.
Raptors. Yeah, the Raptors
Yeah.
series. That was a fun one.
Yeah.
Uh, Rodney Stuckey was on the Pacers at that point.
Yes, he
So
was. Rodney Stuckey was on that
I think
Pacers team.
that was
Wow.
Frank Vogel's last year. That's when Miles and
It
Jan
was.
Mahimi started together at the 4 and the 5. So
Yep. Yep. Paul George was very good in that series, man.
yeah,
He was incredible in that series. Anyways, this is
yes, we're going
not
down,
yeah, memory
memory
lane
lane.
here. Memory lane. If I do, are we doing predictions? Are we throwing
Yeah,
out
give me
a
your
prediction?
prediction. I mean, I've already gave mine last episode. So
Sure. Yeah. Pacers in 6. I think
yeah,
it's Pacers in 6 without Giannis. I think if Giannis comes game 2 or 3, I might be able to push Pacers to 7. But I really do think that regardless, that this will be a Pacers series to win. There are some ways that Milwaukee wins this. We talked about Middleton potentially turning into All-Star form. If Giannis comes back and he's more healthy than we're expecting, then that changes things. There are different versions of this. Dame going off also. There's different versions where Milwaukee can win, but I think I would lean Indiana.
yeah, I think
Not just saying that. I'm not just saying that because I'm on an Indiana Pacers
yeah,
podcast, by the way. I'm
right.
not just, yeah.
Yeah, and I said if Giannis was healthy for the whole series, I'd pick the Bucks in 7. But
Yeah.
because he's probably not going to be, I've got the Pacers in 6 as well. That's what I picked. That's what my co-host picked.
Right.
And it feels like if Giannis doesn't come back at all, I think you're probably looking at Pacers in 5, maybe
5,
Pacers in
yeah.
4, even. But the biggest thing I would
4 would
say,
be surprising.
yes,
Yeah,
just the
that's
Pacers winning a game 5 in Milwaukee seems very unlikely.
true.
That's why 6 feels safe. I
Mhm.
can't see Indiana winning a game 7 in Milwaukee. I mean, never say never, right? But you don't usually see that where a team wins
Yeah.
on the road in a game 7. It'd be awesome, right, for
Yeah.
Indiana. But that's the biggest thing. And I think my other fear is we've seen this Pacers team overlook teams that don't have their best player, or, they're a team that's struggling. If Milwaukee doesn't have Giannis, do the Pacers kind of get big eyes and say, we got this game in
Well,
the
we got,
bag?
yeah, right. Yeah.
They can't have that mentality. I'm pretty sure Rick Carlisle is trying to beat that out of them every single practice. You can't worry about who's on the court. You got to just go out there and win. Like, if he's not there, that's an advantage, but we have to take advantage of it. We can't allow the Bucks to hang around because that
Right.
crowd in Milwaukee is great. And we know that they have great fans there. A little annoying on social media sometimes, but I mean, when the Pacers beat you 4 out of 5 games, they're going to be insufferable on the one they win. So,
Hey, when was the last time that I'm trying to rack my brain around it? When was the last time the Pacers were in a playoff series?
it was back in the
20
bubble when they played
Oh,
the Heat.
2020?
Yeah,
Okay, got you.
they
Oh,
played the Heat.
right, right. TJ Warren. Yes, I remember
Yep.
now. Okay.
That's when Oladipo was,
Yeah, yeah.
can I come play with y'all with Bam Adebayo after the game series sweep.
Oh my
Um,
God, I remember that. I remember
yeah,
that.
that was a
Yes.
fun one there. So yeah, it'll be fun though. I think everyone's excited for the Pacers to, get back and really kind of showcase what they can do.
Yep.
Fun, different team, different coach. Obviously, a lot to play for here. I think, the Pacers really have nothing to lose. If they lose this series, I don't think anybody's going to be like, well, we expected that. Uh, I think everyone's just going to be like, okay, the Pacers made it, right? If
Right.
they win anything, this is a great opportunity. Now, I have said all year long, really, since the in-season tournament run, this kind of feels like the Pacers have a legitimate shot to make it to the Eastern Conference Finals, similar to the Hawks when they made it with Trae Young in his first year,
Right.
beating the Knicks in that first series. But I wouldn't bank on it. I don't know if they can get past their opponent in round two,
Right.
but
With New York or Philly.
New York or
Yeah.
Philly, I think those are going to be really tough opponents. But I think if they win this one convincingly and have more confidence in themselves, hey, you just never know. All you got to do is click at the right time.
Yeah. And either way, they play a former Raptor, by the way, which is funny. In New York, they play OG. In Philly, they're playing Kyle
Oh,
Lowry and Nick Nurse, which is just funny how that life works now.
man,
Yeah. Anyways, sorry, I don't mean to make it Raptors esque,
it's
but
all right.
I'm excited. I'm excited to watch this series. This is probably, if we talk about all the narrative aspects, the in season tournament, the ball gates, and everything, this is definitely one of those ones that you have to be tuned in for every game. So I'm excited for that.
Yeah, for sure. I'm excited too. I'm think it's going to be a fun series. And you know what? Can the Pacers? My thing for the Pacers, can they keep the pace up fast and not allow Damian Lillard to kind of get into a slow half court game because that's where he thrives. But if you make Dame run a lot, you'll probably see some similar numbers to what he did in the regular season,
Right.
and that was a lot of shots, but not a lot of high percentage, numbers. And I think if
Yeah.
you can kind of get Dame to score 25 points on 25% shooting from three, you live with that. It's
Right.
you just don't want Dame going for 40 some points on like 60% shooting. That's where it's going to get
It'll
problematic.
happen for one game. He'll get
Yeah,
one game where it's like that, and that's like that'll be their game 3 or 4 win, or maybe game 2, whatever.
yeah,
But that'll probably they'll be the one game that makes it 2-1 or 3-2 or whatever, and then you
yeah.
end up winning it
5:30 tip off for the first Pacers game. I think it's so crazy. 5:30. What a weird time. Uh, who
Was
knows?
that
But
what is that Sunday, right? Sunday?
no, it's on a Friday night. 5:30 on a Friday
Oh, for game 3.
for
Interesting.
game
What?
three. Yeah.
Huh.
Everyone's like, wow, the NBA is trying to screw the Pacers. Like, yeah, I don't understand. It's on ESPN too. Whatever. I mean, it's a reason to get off early from work Friday. That's the only thing I can say.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah,
So,
exactly.
S, I appreciate it, man.
Of
Appreciate your
course.
prediction for this series. Any final thoughts before we wrap up?
No, I'm excited for the playoffs in general. Playing has been a lot of fun. Sadly, a couple of injuries, but it's been fun to watch regardless. And I'm just excited for the playoffs. It's going to be insane. I think it's prepping up to be one of the best playoffs we've had in a while, I think.
Yeah, I think, with how much parity there is in the league, it makes it very exciting because you just know there's a lot of different teams like that are lower seeds that could win
Yeah.
against some of the higher seeds. And I think that's what makes it very exciting. I mean,
Like the
Lakers,
Pacers.
Nuggets. What'd you say?
I like the Pacers.
Yeah.
They
And,
could add very easy
a lot of
upset.
people like Philly.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Even
Absolutely.
Cleveland Orlando is kind of an interesting matchup. I know people are kind of
Big
sleeping
time.
on that. It's the NBA TV series. They got all the early tip offs, 1 o'clock
Right.
games on the weekends, but I think it could be interesting. I kind of hope that Orlando gives Cleveland,
Some trouble.
yeah, just because Cleveland tanked their way into the 4 seed to
Yeah.
play Orlando.
Well, I'll tell you this. If Orlando wins that series, Boston is going to be sweating a little bit. And I'm not saying that the Celtics are going to have any problems with them, but the Magic, for some reason, do extremely well against the Celtics. They've had
Yeah,
their number for like 2 seasons in a row. I just think it's a good matchup. They like it. And so, yeah, if that happens, maybe that second round series becomes a lot more interesting too.
yeah, and I think Chicago. I mean, excuse me, Boston is getting a bit of a break here with Jimmy Butler being hurt
Yeah.
for Miami, going to
Yeah.
be missing some time, and then obviously Alex Caruso goes down for the Bulls.
Right.
What team are they going to get? Probably won't really matter if both those guys aren't able to play. I mean, I think obviously if the Heat have Jimmy Butler, it's a totally different series. But
Right.
you go back and just look at the way that all went down, just like a big bummer because Jimmy Butler was so good last season, and not being able to see him in the playoffs is going to suck. But it'll be nice for someone else new to be in there. But I feel like that would have been a fun first round matchup for sure, like a 1 versus 8. Like you just wouldn't expect that. Like here's your reward: Eric Spoelstra, Jimmy Butler, Bam Adebayo.
Yeah, I
Congrats!
know. I know. And
Wow.
man, even for New York, it's like hey, you fought for the second seed. Here are the Philadelphia 76ers with Joel Embiid, like
Yeah, nine
it's
and zero
it's
now
funny
since
how that
Joel's come
works.
back.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
So anyway, as I appreciate it. Where can everybody find you out on social media?
Yeah, at just Es Baraheni on Twitter or X or whatever you want to call it. Pretty much everything else too. And yeah, do the writing at Forbes, some content stuff for Bleacher Report and whatnot. But yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Awesome, man.
Appreciate you.
Yeah, appreciate it. And Pacer fans will be back for probably a post game recap. We might be back on Saturday, don't know yet, but more than likely going to be back Sunday for that post game recap, and we'll have everything covered for Game 1 coverage. So you guys are going to want to enjoy. Make sure you tune into that and enjoy that. So we will talk to y'all later next week.